We discussed the whole supplemental situation at some length and many other subjects. Now look, Senate Democrats have been clear. The right and only path forward is bipartisanship. We must stand with our allies in Israel. We must send humanitarian aid to innocent civilians in Gaza. We must hold the line against Vladimir Putin by supporting Ukraine. And we must rebuff the aggressions of the Chinese Communist Party in the Indo-Pacific. The best, most efficient, and fastest way to help is through bipartisanship. In fact, it's the only way. And that's why I was so deeply disappointed by Speaker Johnson's first major legislative action, a purely partisan action. House Republicans released a partisan and woefully inadequate package with no aid to Ukraine, no humanitarian assistance for Gaza, no funding for Indo-Pacific, and poison pills that help wealthy tax cheats avoid paying their fair share. And the irony of it all is their whole idea with pay-fors is to reduce the deficit. This poison pill increases the deficit. Their price for helping Israel and abandoning America's responsibilities around the globe, making it much easier for the ultra-rich to cheat on their taxes. How the heck could that be their highest priority? It's only when the hard right governs the Republican caucus. All friends of Israel should say loudly and clearly that any move to make the U.S.-Israel relationship a partisan one is a move that hurts Israel. The House GOP package is woefully inadequate, has the hard right's fingerprints all over it, making aid to Israel, who just faced the worst terrorist attack in history, contingent on poison pills that help ultra-wealthy tax cheats. It's insulting that the hard right is openly trying to exploit the crisis in Israel and try to reward the ultra-rich. The new speaker knows perfectly well that if you want to truly help Israel, you can't propose legislation that's filled with poison pills. And this kind of unnecessary partisan legislation sends the wrong message to our allies and adversaries around the world. We need bipartisanship and not partisan gamesmanship. It's almost as if the real goal of the House GOP is not to help Israel, but rather to get tax relief for the super wealthy while leaving out Ukraine, humanitarian aid for Gaza, and funding for the Indo-Pacific. Again, I say to Speaker Johnson, I plead with him, don't repeat the mistake of McCarthy and others and just follow the hard right in a partisan way. It's not good for the country. It's not good for the House. It's not even good for the Republican Party. I hope he will change his ways. And the last thing Republicans in Congress should be doing is what they have done, exploiting the crisis, not trying to solve it. Senator Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I just chaired a hearing with Secretaries Blinken and Austin about the national security challenges we face in Ukraine, in Israel, the Indo-Pacific, and around the world. And in our discussion, it was clear senators on both sides of the aisle understand we have to meet this moment with one robust package. We can't just do half of our job here. Because while the challenges we and our partners face across the globe are distinct, they are connected and they are urgent. This is not the time to be short-sighted or play political games like Speaker Johnson's proposal does. We are not abandoning our allies in Ukraine. We are not punting on life-saving humanitarian aid. And we are not conditioning our support for Israel on giving billionaire tax cheats a get-out-of-jail-free card. That is a proposal that will go nowhere here in the Senate. This is a time to be strategic and work together for the good of our country. We need a package that treats each of these crises seriously, and that's exactly what I'm working on drafting with Senator Collins. We must take a full view of this moment. If we're going to get this right, we have to understand how these conflicts are developing today and what our strategy is for the future. It's It's especially important we see the big picture without losing sight of the human reality on the ground, the fact that in the middle of every conflict are civilians, residents who are displaced from their homes, hostages torn from their families, people facing obstacles getting basic medical services, and kids and families who desperately need food and water. Any package absolutely must continue our long-standing and all-important tradition of leading the global humanitarian response that really matters. Let me be clear here. We are helping make sure people have food and water and medical care, whether they are in Ukraine or in Gaza. It's not just the right and moral thing to do, it is also very clearly in our national interest as it promotes long-term stability and security, combating hopelessness that can spiral into new threats. We have to show we understand that, because make no mistake, Hamas is hoping that we ignore the humanitarian needs in Gaza so it can drive people to despair, then anger. We cannot play into their hands. Investing in humanitarian aid makes the world and America safe. This is absolutely a critical component of any supplemental. All of our adversaries are watching closely to see whether we have the vision here to recognize how these crises are related and the resolve to come together and respond forcefully to them. I hope senators on both sides of the aisle are ready to show our adversaries unity, not dysfunction. And finally, before I conclude, let me say this firmly and unequivocally. We are the United States of America. We can stand with our allies around the world and tackle the challenges facing our families here at home at the same time. And at times like this, we must. So I will keep pushing for us to take swift action on domestic challenges like the child care crisis as well. Thank you.
Senator Cardin.
President Biden's supplemental appropriations in regards to national security foreign policy is absolutely essential for our national security. When Speaker Johnson separated the package, pulling Israel out and ignoring Ukraine, it was a gift of Vladimir Putin. The signal that sends is that this is not a priority of the United States, and it sends a message to our partners that it is not as important for us to help Ukraine. We need to keep this package together. The need for Ukrainian aid is now. We're facing the winter months when the international support for Ukraine will be absolutely vital for Ukraine to be able to maintain the gains that they have made and to protect their country moving forward. We must keep this package together. In regards to Israel, the aid is absolutely essential. We got to make sure that Israel can defend itself. And we know that it needs the interceptors and it needs the technologies from the incoming missiles. But as a part of this package is the humanitarian package that is also vitally important. Senate Foreign Relations Committee met today with Ambassador Herzog and members of the military from Israel. We recognize that we have to be strategic, not only in defending Israel from Hamas, but making sure we do it in a way consistent with values. The humanitarian aid is absolutely essential. We've seen major progress made in the last several days, and we also recognize we need to work now for the day after this war is over to make sure that there are seeds planted for responsible leadership for the people of Gaza, for a future with Israel and Gaza, two states living side by side in peace. This supplemental appropriation being passed now is absolutely essential in forwarding those goals. It's the United States security interest to keep this package intact, to help Israel, to help Ukraine, to help the Asian Pacific, to help the humanitarian crisis.
Thank you, Senator Schumer, for your clear-eyed leadership on this. I want to also thank Senators Cardin and Murray for their words. This has been a very difficult time in our nation and in our world. For over 3 weeks, The daily news has been filled with stories of pain and tragedy in Israel and in Gaza. The atrocities committed in Israel by Hamas on October 7th were sickening. The stories from that barbaric attack continue to filter through, and their inhumanity shocks the conscience. It is critically important that the United States continue to stand in full support of Israel and its right to defend itself. The supplemental package contains robust resources to accomplish that goal, as well as face the security challenges in Ukraine and the South Pacific. We have to stand united against those working to undermine us. The package also demonstrates that the United States and our allies understand that this war is against Hamas, not Palestinian civilians. We will not turn a blind eye to the suffering Hamas's atrocities have brought to Gaza, or fail to recognize the need to provide that humanitarian aid. The supplemental funding request includes life-saving humanitarian assistance for Gaza. These are people who need our help, babies, children. They have hurt no one, and they are not our enemies. They too are victims of Hamas. By swiftly passing the supplemental funding, we would be sending a message to the world that the United States stands by its principles, stands by our allies, and that we will hold Hamas accountable while protecting innocent lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Yes.
Did you really anticipate something different from Speaker Johnson? I mean, his problems are the same that Kevin McCarthy has. If you were to move on something else, they would move to vacate the chair.
You answered in a certain sense your own question, but he should have learned. Speaker Johnson should learn from the examples of Speaker Boehner, of Speaker Ryan, and of Speaker McCarthy. If you try to let the hard right run your caucus, it's going to lead to real problems for you, your party, your Senate, your House, and your country.
Leader
Yes.
Would you be open to offsetting any of the emergency foreign aid package?
Emergency foreign aid should not be offset. Yes.
Is there any scenario that you would support a package that did not include funding to both Ukraine and Israel?
We are for, and I'm working with Leader McConnell closely to try and get a package that we both feel strongly that we need aid for Israel, we need aid for Ukraine, we need aid for the South Asia, and we feel very strongly, I do certainly, that we need humanitarian aid for innocent civilians in Gaza who are hurt. Yes, no, him.
Is your end goal to force Speaker Johnson's hand here?
Our end goal is to get something done. There are dictators who are looking for the United States to fail. There's Putin, there's Xi, there's the people in Iran. So we have to be strong and united at this time in our history and support our allies.
Leader Schumer,
Yes.
at this point, would you say that whatever the House sends over at the end of this week, if it's just Israel, is dead on arrival?
Look, the bottom line is it's not a serious proposal. Yes.
What do you say to folks within your own party who are calling for a ceasefire and also calling
Look,
President Biden to be more
there should be
against Israel's actions?
Okay, there are three goals that Israel must have: to radically reduce the threat of Hamas, to save the hostages, and to minimize innocent civilian casualties. Last one.
The Commandant has been hospitalized. The Commandant of the Marine Corps. Would you be willing to bring the number 2 nominee?
Look, I'd say this: the crisis that we have makes it even more apparent that Republicans themselves should get Tuberville to back off what he is doing now more than ever, and I hope that they will. What happened with the Marine Corps Commandant shows just the reason we don't know who the next person is who might get ill or whatever, so we need to do everybody, and they got to push everybody, and we'll be pushing the Republicans to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've just returned from the southern border, and it's painfully clear that with Joe Biden's open border strategy, we're at increased risk of terrorism. Just 3 days before I got there, alert border agents seized migrant with 4 explosive devices, the size of cannonballs. These are clearly tailor-made for terrorism. The night we were on midnight patrol, we encountered a couple of dozen of migrants from as far away as Moldova. One man, middle-aged, said he was traveling as a family. That's because families receive special treatment. He was holding tightly onto a 10-year-old girl. There was no mother. There was no sign of affection. And, you know, we used to do things like DNA testing to make sure that children weren't being exploited. Well, Joe Biden canceled all the DNA testing, so now you don't know who is coming into this country pretending to be families. 8 million illegal immigrants have come into this country during Joe Biden's presidency. Last month, another all-time high. It's gotten so bad the Department of Homeland Security has issued an increased risk of terrorism in this country. Of those 8 million, 2 million are gotaways, people that run and hide so they're not captured. Even if only 1 of 1,000 of them are terrorists, that's still 2,000 terrorists in our midst. Remember, 9/11, it only took a dozen terrorists to take down the World Trade Center and hit the Pentagon. The Border Patrol knows what we need to do. It's enforce the law. It's bring back the Remain in Mexico policy. It's this ending of catch and release and finish building the wall. Joe Biden won't allow any of it. Any additional border funding has to be used to stop the flow, not to make them come faster. Republicans in the Senate and the House are committed to fighting for our homeland security, even if our president is not.
So it's been about 3.5 weeks now since I was in the Middle East and visited Israel immediately following the attacks by Hamas. And folks, you just need to make no mistake about it, that this chaos from Iranian-backed Hamas and the atrocities that they are committing, they are being fueled by Biden's appeasement strategy in the Middle East. Since President Biden took office, we have seen over $80 billion go into the pockets of the IRGC because President Biden has refused to enforce existing sanctions on Iran. And I am planning to put an end to this, this proxies payday. I have a bipartisan bill, again, bipartisan, that cuts the red tape and it equips Homeland Security investigations and its proven record of enforcing sanctions with the resources it needs to go after and stop Tehran. So what we're planning to do, stop that money. We're going to enforce sanctions, stop the money going to Iran and the IRGC, take it out of their bloody little hands and give it to those that are victims of terrorism, and use it as well to pay down our national debt. So again, it's a bipartisan bill, and it's time we put an end to Biden's appeasement strategy and the refusal to enforce sanctions.
Good afternoon. This morning, we had a hearing in the Appropriations Committee with Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin to talk about the supplemental and the needs. I believe they made a very good and compelling case why we need to continue supporting Ukraine with our weaponry and how important it is for us to push Putin back and to keep him from achieving any kind of victory and to help the Ukrainians achieve that victory. Also in Israel, the case was made both on the military side but on the humanitarian side that we see developing in Gaza with some tough questions from many sides, both sides of the aisle, from our members as to where that money goes, who actually distributed it, and could it ever get into the hands of Hamas. But one part of the hearing was missing. We're going to have another hearing next week. But we did not get to, I don't think, one of the most important things about our national security, which is our southern border. It's already been mentioned today, over 200 people from the terror watch list. have been apprehended at the southern border just recently. We don't know where these people are from. It won't be disclosed where they're from. But all of this is tied in together because we can't sit here and help the rest of the world and not realize and not make sure that we're taking care of what's going on at home. I'm deeply disturbed by what I see as a rising anti-Semitism around the country. You see people on college campuses and elsewhere, and it's around the globe, but it really troubles me when I see it here at home. It's something I really never thought that I would see in my lifetime. So I look forward to having Senator Mayorkas and Senator Becerra in front of, or Secretary Mayorkas and Secretary Becerra in front of our Appropriations Committee next week as we consider how we're going to handle the supplemental, but also what parts of it are absolutely essential and what parts of it need to be shelved and moved to the back burner.
The odds that terrorists are coming across our southern border into the United States are increasing on an hour-by-hour basis. Last week, if you remember, I spoke about Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Syria, these state sponsors of terror that our Border Patrol agents are encountering on our southern border. By the way, since October 1st, look at the month of October, hundreds of individuals from just those 4 countries have crossed the southern border of the United States. In September, it was more than 1,000. Let me highlight another, and that's Yemen, home of the Houthis. If you've been watching the news in the last couple of hours, the Houthis officially declared war on Israel. 74 citizens of Yemen were encountered on our southern border last year. Afghanistan, Lebanon, Somalia, Russia, more than 500 crossed here from those countries last month. People there, they hate us. So we should be prepared that they could attack us from within. Money's not going to stop it. This is primarily a policy battle. We need to tighten the asylum standards. We need to reform the parole program. And yes, we should finish building the wall. I want to make a short comment about anti-Semitism and what's happening in our country. Over the weekend, we saw protests over in London. We saw riots in Russia in an airport searching for Jews, asking for papers to find the Jews. But here at home, look at our campuses. Cooper Union, Jewish students were locked in a library, hiding in an attic, scared for their lives. Cornell, Jewish students were threatened and told just to hide. In Tulane, Jewish freshman was assaulted and a nose broken. Anti-Semitism equates the hatred of the Jews, and this must be forcefully condemned by U.S. leaders.
Leader McConnell. Good afternoon. What do you say to some of your Republican critics who oppose your advocacy for Ukraine? Senator Paul said that you were trying to undercut the new Speaker of the House. Senator Hawley called your position a, quote, mistake.
Well, let me just say that conceptually, Senator Schumer and I are in the same place in the sense that we view all of these problems as connected. Ukraine is part of it. Obviously, Israel enjoys overwhelming support, but we think it's also important that we have a part related to Asia, and that's Taiwan. And then, as several of my members have underscored, we think it's important to do something credible about our own border, which is basically wide open. So conceptually, I think Schumer and I are in the same place. In terms of the details, what is really needed to protect the border? Not a bunch of money going to Chicago and New York, but something seriously drafted. And we're working on that, and I think the Democrats will have to accept a really serious U.S.-Mexico border protection bill in order
to get our people on board for a comprehensive approach.
But it seems like there's disconnect between you and some of your Republican members, specifically on the Ukraine issue, not so much on the border.
Well, I don't have to explain to you, the form that the bill takes will be determined by the majority leader. And we'll see after that whether there are amendments offered and how they turn out. I'm just speaking for myself. I think we need to address all four of those areas in a credible way.
Leader McConnell.
What is your reaction to the House Speaker's Israel-only bill?
Well, that's an opinion many people have. It's not surprising, but in order to make a law, it has to pass both bodies and be signed by the president. And we'll see if the bill comes out of the House, and if so, what kind of margin it has. My own view, I just expressed, is that we need to treat all four of these areas, all four of them, Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the border.
Leader McConnell.
Do you have any reaction to Senator Durbin's announcement that the Judiciary Committee is going to subpoena Harlan Crow, Robin Arkley, Leonard Leo as part of its Supreme Court ethics investigation?
Yeah, well, what he's targeting here is private citizens with no legislative purpose. I think it's completely and totally inappropriate.
Leader McConnell.
The Commandant of the Marine Corps has been hospitalized, and it's renewed questions about Tommy Tuberville's holds on military promotions. Do you think that it's time for him to lift those holds so that those promotions can go through?
I'm sure you remember that I said this was a bad idea quite a while ago. I still think it's a bad idea, and particularly applied to people who don't make policy. And so I have been among those trying to convince Senator Tuberville to express his opposition some other way by people who actually make policy, as opposed to our military heroes who are sworn to stay out of politics.